Hello and welcome. In this presentation, we are going to learn about using a command for more information with textual prompts to teach intraverbal responses. But I think it's important to first discuss some of the backgrounds of verbal behavior. What are intraverbal responses? Well, first and foremost, in 1957, B.F. Skinner broke verbal behavior down into 4 categories: a command or a request, tact or a label, echoic, repeating the word or phrase, and intraverbal behavior, which is responding to a verbal operant. This presentation focuses on the latter, intraverbal behavior, as this is an important part of our day-to-day communication. When we're responding to our boss or coworkers, we are displaying intraverbal behavior. When we are singing our favorite song, we're displaying intraverbal behavior. Just trust me, it happens all the time. One of the most identifiable characteristics in individuals with autism is the delay in functional communication and expressive language, which can really lead to a less than average quality of life. This is why it is such an important skill to teach children with autism and all children struggling with intraverbal responding. Why bother teaching a command for more information? I'm sure you're wondering why we would not rather just focus on teaching the correct response. And that is a very valid question, to which I have a pretty simple answer. In our everyday life, we don't always know the right answer. We just don't. Therefore, teaching a request for the answer or more information is a very critical skill in these situations. Research shows that teaching a command for more information can be impactful in several ways. First, echolalia and stereotypy tend to be higher with unfamiliar, unknown tasks. So teaching to command for more information can help decrease stereotypy while increasing a functional skill. Second, it may help to reduce errors, as a student could request a more intrusive prompt rather than make an error. And finally, the skill in teaching can be implemented in a range of activities. And in terms of how to teach the skill of commanding for more information, or teaching any intraverbal for that matter, research also shows that using textual prompting is a more effective way compared to verbal prompting to teach intraverbal responding to children with autism. One of the reasons why textual prompts are more effective is because they are so much easier to fade than a verbal prompt is. Because children with autism can become so prompt dependent, meaning whether they know the answer or not, they will wait for the prompt of the instructor. Using a prompt that can be faded is essential, and research does show that this is much easier done with textual prompts than with verbal prompts. The strategies we will discuss are geared towards a center-based facility and meant to be implemented at the group level, although implementation can also be done at the one-to-one individualized level. This intervention is currently being implemented with individuals diagnosed with autism ranging in age from 2 to 17. However, the strategies provided can be applied to any individual with deficits in commanding or requesting things like help. The first step in any intervention is to acquire baseline data. Baseline data is collected at the skill level prior to intervention. For this particular strategy, a skills assessment is also necessary to determine the child's current level of intraverbals and what questions they are unable to answer. Another important step prior to implementation is to run a preference assessment. An appropriate reinforcer is key to any intervention. You want to ensure the child is motivated to learn, so running preference assessments to determine what the child is motivated for on that particular day should be a frequent part of your practice. Okay, now you've done a skills assessment, run your preference assessment, and collected baseline data. You're now ready to start your teaching trials. Research shows that errorless teaching is the most effective way to teach a new skill to individuals with an autism spectrum disorder. So we want to start with the most to least prompting in order to minimize error. With most to least prompting, you want to start with the most intrusive prompt level for the target skill. In this case, the most intrusive prompt is a verbal prompt paired with a full textual prompt. And once this skill is mastered at 3 consecutive days with no errors, the skill will be taught at the next prompt level, a full textual prompt with no verbal prompt, followed by a partial phrase prompt, a one-word prompt, and a blank card visual prompt. I'll show examples of these prompt cards in the slides to follow, but I want to get back to the mastery criteria for prompt promotion. Data are collected throughout the session and graphed at the end of the day. The recommended teaching trials per day is 10, and the student has mastered the skill at the current prompt level when there are 3 consecutive days at 100% no errors. This means for 3 days, every time you provide the discriminative stimulus, being the question the child cannot answer, along with the verbal and textual prompt, they correctly answer, "I don't know, please tell me," either vocally or using a speech-generating device. It is important to note that if you are teaching a child using a SGD, a gestural prompt will replace a verbal prompt in your teaching trials to teach the child how to demand for information using their device. Remember, too, that reinforcement is key, so we will be using a fixed ratio 1 schedule of reinforcement during teaching trials, where the child will be reinforced after every correct response. Once the skill has been mastered, reinforcement should be put on a variable ratio scale to aid in maintenance and generalization of the skill. So here's an example of what your textual prompt will look like. This card is for phase 1 of your intervention, so here you will be pairing this card with the verbal prompt, "I don't know, please tell me," or with the gestural prompt to the SGD. Doing so helps teach even the children who cannot read that when the card is present, this is what it means. "I don't know, please tell me." And then here are examples of what the faded prompt will look like, each time losing a word of the phrase until the entire card is blank. And remember, we're not progressing to the next card until there are 3 consecutive days of demanding, "I don't know, please tell me," with no errors. So let me show you an example of what phase 1 would look like. Here you're sitting at a table with your students and you call on one student to ask your predetermined question. "Michael, what's the capital of Maryland?" Now immediately hold up your textual prompt and say out loud, "I don't know, please tell me." To which the desired response is Michael repeating, "I don't know, please tell me." You're going to find his preferred reinforcer, he's working for goldfish, deliver the goldfish along with behavior-specific praise. "Wow, Michael, great job telling me you don't know. I would love to tell you the answer. The capital of Maryland is Annapolis." And remember, we're repeating this a minimum of 10 times per teaching trials to ensure you're collecting enough data for that day. If you are working with a learner who uses a speech-generating device, your teaching trials will, for the most part, look the same. The difference comes in the type of visual prompt you're using, and rather than using a verbal prompt, you will use a gestural prompt to guide the learner to use their SGD. The discriminative stimulus you use should match the system that the child uses. So rather than holding up the textual prompt, you will instead hold up a prompt that matches the icon on their system. Let me show you an example. Again, I'm going to be working with Michael. I'll call on Michael and say, "Michael, what's the capital of Maryland?" I'm immediately going to hold up my icon that matches his prolocal icon while gesturing for him to use his SGD. He presses the appropriate icon and his device will say out loud, "I don't know, please tell me." And again, I'm immediately reinforcing with his goldfish and behavior-specific praise. "Great job telling me you don't know. The capital of Maryland is Annapolis." And in terms of fading a visual prompt for an SGD learner, rather than removing words like in the textual prompts, these visual stimuli will be faded by lightening the shade of the picture until eventually the card is blank. The suggested mastery criteria is how we are determining the success of the intervention. One day of success could occur for numerous reasons. Maybe the child is really motivated for your attention that day and they're just repeating everything you say. In this case, it's not a mastered skill, just the result of the child really wanting your attention. Using this mastery criteria will help to establish a strong skill at each phase, but the true sign of a successful intervention is when the behavior occurs independently with no prompting, again, for 3 consecutive days. To begin agency-wide implementation of this intervention, first determine if the existing budget can support the intervention as every state's funding varies. Next, decide if you have existing staff who are both qualified and able to provide the intervention. Once budget and staff are in place, utilize assessment and review data to determine which clients could benefit from the intervention. This will be implemented at a Tier 2 level and moving to more individualized level or Tier 3 as needed. Next, train your staff. Be sure to thoroughly explain all relevant research and give examples of how this intervention can work to ensure that you have their buy-in. Model enthusiasm so your team is excited to try this new intervention. Train in small groups of no more than 8 staff members and follow lecture and written notes, which can be used as a reference for staff later. And finally, practice in pairs using all materials that you would use with the client. Provide corrective feedback and follow up with observation of each staff implementing this intervention to ensure fidelity, giving positive reinforcement as well as feedback to your staff often. Finally, whenever possible, train families and other members of the child's team to also provide this intervention to encourage generalization to all areas of the child's life. Knowing that no two children with autism are the same, it's important to keep in mind that you may need to modify your plan to fit the needs of your learner. There may be cases where a child simply doesn't want to repeat your verbal prompt and you have to add in additional discriminative stimulus, such as, "Now you say it," in order to really shape up the skill. And while this is a strategy geared towards group instruction, it can be taught at the one-to-one level. Another way the program can be modified would be to increase the mastery criteria a day or two depending on the student. The end goal is independence, so you very well may need to modify to help ensure that this happens. If your resources allow and you have families willing to participate in implementation, train your parents on the procedure so they can prompt the child at home to request more information. Keep them informed on the current prompt level and send the child home with appropriate textual prompts. Learning in multiple settings will only help with your child's maintenance, generalization, and overall independence of the skill. And my final tip is to have fun and be patient. Good luck!